Teal here. Let's talk today about Google's internet echo chamber, or at least the planned future for it anyway, and I believe it may also shed a little bit of light on some of the trends for the rest of the internet, and the attempt to basically sanitize all of it. So in order to do this, we're going to look at several different sources, and you may be familiar with some of them because they've all happened within the last week. First of all, there was the revelation about YouTube's new limited state for certain videos that don't actually violate any of their policies, but that Google just kind of finds objectionable on some level. Google said that they'll be applying tougher treatment to videos that aren't illegal, but have been flagged by users as potential violations of our policies on hate speech and violent extremism. So it would appear that in order to trigger a video being in this limited state, it has to have been flagged once. So hopefully it shouldn't be the case that entire channels are just going to vanish one day by having all of their stuff put in the limited section whereby they can't be liked or upvoted in any way, they can't really be shared, they can't be commented on, they can't be searched, they won't appear in the recommended tabs, and so on. So really the only way that that could happen for a channel would be if someone went through and flagged every single one of their videos at least once. And then Google did decide that even though they weren't in violation, that they would still have said something a little bit off-color. So on the surface, it wouldn't appear to be as doom and gloom as it might first appear, and as some people are making it out to be. But that is of course just the surface, and as always, I want to go a little deeper. Google has been working on artificial intelligence and computer learning for many years now. In fact, it appears to be somewhat a source of pride for them that over 75% of the videos that were removed from YouTube for violent extremism over the past month were taken down by their AI, before receiving a single human flag. That means that this AI, computer learning algorithm, whatever it is that you want to call it, is operating fairly autonomously with not a whole lot of human input. In fact, Google goes so far as to say that while this machine isn't perfect and the tools that it has aren't right for every setting, that in many cases it has still proven itself to be more accurate than humans when it comes to flagging videos that need to be removed. But of course the question has to be asked, even though there appears to not be that much human involvement when it comes to this AI removing videos from YouTube anyway, who exactly are the people who are influencing the AI? Well, apparently Google has got on board 15 expert non-government organizations who have been through the Trusted Flagger program, which basically means that all of these organizations are YouTube heroes, which was pretty much YouTube's attempt to gamify flagging videos by rewarding users with points for mass flagging people's content, and anyone taking part in this program would have to be educated by Google via workshops in how to correctly and appropriately flag content. And that process of education is something which we'll talk about a little bit later, relating to Google and its general ideological leaning. Of course, this isn't the first that we've heard about YouTube using an AI to help filter content for its users. In fact, the Jigsaw AI has recently begun redirecting people's searches to find things that directly confront and debunk violent extremist messages. So Google has taken it upon itself to curate your search results. You will no longer be presented information by important metrics such as most viewed, most interacted with, most shared, anything like that. What you will see will now be prioritized by its political bent, and whether or not YouTube finds it agreeable or not. But the burning question does of course still remain. Who exactly are the people at Google, or that Google is working with, who are deciding what counts as extremist content or not? Well, let's just back up a little bit to Google's talk about more experts. And we've got three names very obviously displayed here: the Anti-Defamation League, the No Hate Speech Movement, and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. That would be the ADL who tell you that jokes matter because telling a joke that's a little bit off color is some sort of magical window into your psyche that magically proves that you are definitely racist or sexist or something along those lines. This is the same ADL who entered the Great Meme War of 2016 and declared Pepe the Frog as a hate symbol, because they found this one picture on the internet that they use as the header for this article, despite the fact that if you Google Pepe the Frog, well, it's a little bit different. But the endorsement of this position by the ADL gave the thinnest of veneers of credibility to the idea that CNN then created a Pepe so rare that it wasn't even on the internet, and used it as an example of Pepe the Frog being associated with white supremacy. In other words, they manufactured the thing that they were then reporting on. Bravo, CNN, bravo. And that was, of course, then picked up by the Clinton presidential campaign. Turns out, dishonesty is totally fine as long as it fits your agenda. And speaking of Google's curation of search results and Googling Pepe the Frog, what are the first Google search results? Well, obviously there's the Wikipedia page, then there's the Anti-Defamation League page, and then all of the articles about how Pepe the Frog is dead because the artist wanted to reclaim it from all of those evil white supremacists. If you want a little bit more evidence of Google curating their searches, look no further than their results on Islam. Google has been manipulating search results for a lot of terms regarding Islam and jihad, and making sure that the top-ranked ones are more reputable search results, by which they of course mean heavily left-leaning biased search results, which amount to little more than Islam apologia. And of course this was welcomed by Muslim communities because it meant that there were less people questioning their religion, or any of the terroristic acts which are associated with it. And that brings us neatly on to the clause about religion that Google posted in that blog of theirs, regarding controversial content. If you read between the lines and are in any way familiar with what Google has been doing over the past several years, you can quite easily see that what this means is not only the removal of Islamic extremist religious content, but also content that could be deemed offensive when it comes to religious views. In other words, anything questioning Islam. Do you want to talk about Muslim terror attacks around the world? Too bad. Go on to YouTube's Naughty Step because that's extremist religious content. Do you want to question uncontrolled third world immigration into the EU? Sorry, can't do that. Those are wrong thoughts for you to be thinking. So we'll just put them in that box over there, shall we? But this talk about religion and the questioning of religion, or even just the philosophical musing about religion, brings us on to our next data point. And that was the mysterious and seemingly unprovoked banning on YouTube of Professor Jordan B Peterson, who not only had his YouTube account locked, but had access to his Gmail account revoked. Google had effectively completely shut him down. Now that could be in relation to the fact that Professor Jordan B Peterson has many videos on his YouTube page where he discusses the topic of religion, and examines it using both philosophy and psychology. But I have a sneaking suspicion that this went beyond merely banning him because he spoke about religion. You may recall that Professor Jordan Peterson has been involved in a lot of public controversy over the last few months, given his stance against the use of multiple pronouns for transgender people, and his address to the Canadian Senate regarding Bill C-16. As a result of this and more, he has effectively become an enemy of the political left, especially the progressive left. Now, as it stands, Professor Peterson was able to get access to his Gmail account back and get his YouTube account reinstated, and I highly suspect that this has something to do with Professor Peterson's popularity. He has a very sizable online following. As such, something negative like this happening to him will generate a lot of backlash. But that then leads us to the question, what exactly would happen to smaller channels if the same thing were to happen to them? And the answer, I think, is not a good one. They'd probably end up in YouTube limbo, or just be outright removed from everything Google, with no hope of return. And now, with all of that out of the way, we get to talk about Google's ideological echo chamber, and why I'm very concerned not only about YouTube's choice of people to be helping its AI to learn what to block and what not to block, but also generally about Google itself and its own politics. Now, I've addressed the formation of ideological echo chambers several times before, and how in an increasing number of places there is a distinct left-leaning bias, with a very good part of that left-leaning bias leaning towards the progressive side of the political left. And recently, a memo which circulated around Google, which pointed out that Google absolutely does have a left-leaning corporate culture, has been made public. This memo which went around really isn't as controversial as a lot of people are making it out, and is certainly not as controversial as Google makes it out to be. In this write-up, the author just points out that people have biases. People with biases come together because they tend to have more in common with each other, because they share certain perspectives on certain topics, and that this process, left unchecked, can result in groupthink and echo chambers where certain ideas become taboo to discuss because of the general consensus of the group, and that this stops people from being able to honestly and openly engage with certain topics. It's completely reasonable, and falls in line with what we know regarding things like social identity theory, a topic which I've discussed in some length on Honey Badger Radio and with Stardusk. And the author of this email then goes on to point out some of the sacred cows that Google has, like the idea that there are no biological differences between men and women, and that any disparity between the two sexes in workplace must be due to oppression. They also address aggregate personality differences between men and women, and how some of these may go some way to explain some of the disparities that you see regarding gender ratios in certain areas of tech. The author then goes on to point out how some of these assumptions that Google has, the denial of basic biological differences between men and women, personality trait differences, general differences in patterns of learning and interaction, and so on, could all ultimately be harmful to Google, especially when it comes to Google doing things like forcing diversity hires, lowering the bar for diversity hires, and only offering mentorship and classes for people of a certain gender or race, and other things of that nature. Even here, just listing off some of the initiatives that Google has, I'm sure you're getting the idea that they are a very left-leaning progressive company. This attitude that's being pointed out no doubt comes from the overrepresentation of left-leaning progressives in the environment. And so this author suggests that rather focusing on diversity of appearance, you should probably focus more on diversity of idea and thought. Something which I think is completely reasonable, because after all, just because a bunch of people are all different races, that doesn't mean they all believe different things. They can all quite easily believe the same thing. Whereas you could have multiple people from within one race who all believe different things. So diversity of appearance does not necessitate having a diversity of opinion, and ultimately a diversity of opinion is probably going to work out better for you in the long run, because you will have lots of different topics being approached from lots of different sides. It massively increases the likelihood that any problems or errors that come up can actually be corrected. One person's dogma is another person's outside-the-box thinking. And what was Google's reaction to this post? Well, it was to send this around. From their Vice President of Diversity, Integrity, and Governance, which absolutely does not in any way sound like some sort of draconian title from the book 1984. Many of you have read an internal document shared by someone in our engineering organization, expressing views on the natural abilities and characteristics of different genders, as well as whether one can speak freely of these things at Google. And like many of you, I found that it advanced incorrect assumptions about gender. I'm not going to link it here, as it's not a viewpoint that I or this company endorses, promotes, or encourages. And that paragraph should tell you everything you need to know, and has in fact completely validated what the person was pointing out in that memo that they released. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence that the genders do have base biological differences, and when considered in the context of things such as the Norwegian gender paradox, that would be the case where, in a gender egalitarian society where men and women can make pretty much any choice that they want, you end up with a larger gender divide in certain fields than in countries which are actually stricter in their gender roles. Despite all of this, no. That is wrongthink. These ideas are incorrect and I do not encourage, promote or endorse them. And I'm not even going to let people go and look at the thing that you said in the first place. They can just take my word for it that I know best. So Google has itself a very distinct bias, and surprise surprise, the AI that Google is using to funnel its search results to its users has picked up on the exact same bias that Google has. So any content that Google deems to be too offensive or too controversial, which at this point seems like it'll be anything that isn't extreme left progressive politics, cat videos or unboxing videos, so anything outside of that, especially if it's centre or god forbid right-wing politics, is going to be excommunicated to YouTube's purgatory. An unsearchable, unvotable, uncommentonable, unmonetizable, virtual limbo for videos and content creators. Frankly, this latest thing just seems to be one more step in the direction that Google wants to go, and that seems to be towards YouTube television. A sanitized, controversy-free space where the mainstream narrative reigns supreme, and you get fed the same repetitive nonsense over and over again, which caused you to move away from television and go to YouTube in the first place. But at this point in time I have to ask, is anyone really surprised by this? Facebook has openly banned and shadow banned people who post things that they don't like, which basically means anything without an extreme left progressive bias. Twitter has been found to shadow ban users and comments, as well as throttle accounts that they don't want people seeing, and this also, perhaps unsurprisingly, has a far-left progressive bias. Patreon has recently been embroiled in controversy after banning some right-leaning commentators from its site, and now YouTube is revealing its cards. And what a surprise, they also have a far-left progressive-leaning bias. So the question now becomes, what is to be done? Can anything be done? Well, it would seem to me that the only way to have any sort of effect on these companies would be to try and hit their bottom line. Find as many alternatives to these services as possible, not just as users but also as content creators. Now I could use this time to do some personal shilling for my alternative internet portals, and I'm absolutely going to. I post all of my videos and several other things, including short shitposts, things that don't really deserve a YouTube video, and in some cases some quite long considerations on a certain topic, to minds.com/tealdeer. It also serves as a hub for update and notifications for live streaming events and other things that I'm involved in. If you want pure video content, you can always go and find all of my stuff available on vid.me/tealdeer. It's just like YouTube, except with a little bit less of the blatant political bias. Although VidMe has also had its recent controversies around removing people's videos and things from their Reddit forum. But now I'm just going to turn this focus to a much wider horizon. It's important that content creators begin migrating to and using these alternative platforms, because by offering alternatives to YouTube you can begin drawing audiences away from Google, and also strengthen smaller platforms and encourage them to grow. For content consumers, the message is similar. Using alternative services is the only way that Google is going to get the message. This includes not only finding video alternatives to YouTube, but keeping in mind the case of Professor Jordan Peterson where he lost his Gmail account, also beginning to look into finding alternative email clients, and moving away from other Google products such as Google Search, the Chrome browser, and any of Google's hardware.